I watched my neighbor's lawn turn from emerald green to the color of burnt toast in just 3 days, and that was when I knew this drought was about to get worse before it got better. My name is Grant Patterson, and I've been living in the Sagebrush Hills community in Bakersfield, California for the past 7 years. When I bought my place back in 2019, the HOA seemed reasonable enough. The monthly fees were not outrageous, the rules made sense, and the neighborhood looked pristine. But then, about 2 years ago, a woman named Deborah Carmichael got elected as the HOA president, and everything went straight to hell. Deborah was 53 years old, with blonde hair that she kept in that specific suburban soccer mom style where the back was longer than the front. She wore excessive amounts of jewelry even when just checking her mailbox, and she had this habit of talking to everyone like they were incompetent children. Within her first month as president, she had already sent violation notices to half the neighborhood for infractions ranging from leaving trash cans out 15 minutes too long to having the wrong shade of beige paint on a fence. But I managed to stay under her radar for the most part. I kept my lawn maintained, followed the rules, and tried to avoid any interaction with her or the HOA board. That all changed in April 2026 when California's drought reached critical levels. The state had already imposed severe water restrictions. Residents were limited to specific days for outdoor watering, and even then, we could only water for short periods. The problem was that my property sat on a slope, and the grass I had been required by the HOA to plant according to their landscaping guidelines needed consistent moisture, or it would die within days. I did some research and found a solution. A local water delivery company could bring in non-potable water suitable for irrigation. It was not cheap, but it was legal and would keep my lawn alive without violating the city's water restrictions. The water came from recycled sources and agricultural runoff that had been treated for irrigation use. I called the company, and they told me they could deliver a 500-gallon tanker to my property once a week. The cost was $240 per delivery, which hurt my wallet. But the alternative was facing daily fines from both the city for wasting municipal water and the HOA for having a dead lawn. California had really put homeowners in an impossible situation. The first delivery went smoothly. The truck arrived on a Tuesday morning, parked in my driveway, and pumped the water into a temporary storage tank I had installed behind my house. The tank was clearly visible from the street, but it was on my property and met all local codes. I had checked with the city before installing it. I used that water throughout the week, carefully irrigating my lawn during the permitted hours. My grass stayed green while my neighbor's yard slowly withered. A few people asked me about my setup, and I was happy to share the information. Several of them even called the same company to arrange their own deliveries. That was when Deborah noticed. On the following Tuesday, when the water truck was scheduled to arrive again, I was in my garage organizing some tools when I heard shouting from my driveway. I walked out to find Deborah standing in front of the water truck, her arms crossed, blocking its path. "This vehicle is not authorized to park on HOA property," she announced loudly. The driver, a young guy named Marcus who had delivered my water the previous week, looked confused. "I'm just making a delivery, madam. I will be done in about 20 minutes. "I do not care how long it takes. This truck is a commercial vehicle, and according to our HOA rules, commercial vehicles are not permitted in residential driveways." I walked up to them, already feeling my blood pressure rising. "Deborah, this is a scheduled delivery. It is the same as having a moving truck or a furniture delivery." She turned to me with that condescending smile that made me want to scream. "Grant, the rules are very clear. No commercial vehicles in driveways. You should have applied for a variance at least 2 weeks in advance." "A variance? For a water delivery? That's ridiculous. People get deliveries all the time." "Those are different. This is a recurring commercial service that requires board approval." She pulled out her phone and took a picture of the truck. "I am documenting this violation. You can either have this truck leave immediately or I will call a towing company." Marcus looked at me apologetically. "Man, I do not want any trouble. I have other deliveries to make anyway." I felt a surge of frustration. "Can you wait just a few minutes? Let me call the management company." But Deborah was already dialing on her phone. "No need. I am calling Allied Towing right now. They contract with our HOA for unauthorized vehicles." You cannot be serious right now, I said, my voice rising. We are in the middle of a drought. I need this water for my lawn, the same lawn that your HOA rules require me to maintain. Then you should have followed the proper procedures, Deborah said simply. Hello, yes, I need a tow truck at 4782 Desert Willow Drive. We have an unauthorized commercial vehicle in a residential driveway. Marcus shook his head. I'm sorry, man. I cannot risk my truck getting towed. That would be a nightmare with my company. He climbed back into the cab and started backing out of my driveway. I stood there watching as my water delivery drove away, feeling absolutely powerless. Deborah ended her call and turned back to me with that same smug expression. In the future, Grant, please remember to submit variance requests in writing to the HOA board. We meet on the first Thursday of every month. Your request would be reviewed and potentially approved within 30 to 45 days. 30 to 45 days? My lawn will be dead in a week without water, she shrugged. Perhaps you should have thought of that before violating HOA regulations. I will be sending you a formal violation notice. That is a $200 fine for the commercial vehicle infraction. She walked away before I could respond, her heels clicking on the pavement. I immediately went inside and called the HOA management company, Prestige Community Management. After being on hold for 15 minutes, I finally got through to a representative named Kevin. I explained the situation, and he sighed like he had heard this story 1,000 times before. Mr. Patterson, technically, Mrs. Carmichael is correct about the commercial vehicle policy. However, given the drought circumstances, that seems like an extreme interpretation. Let me review your account and see what I can do. I need that water delivery, Kevin. My lawn is going to die otherwise, and then I will get fined for that too. I understand. Give me until tomorrow to speak with Mrs. Carmichael and the board. I will call you back. He did not call back the next day, or the day after that. When I finally reached him again on Friday, he sounded defeated. Mr. Patterson, I spoke with the board and they are standing firm on this. You need to submit a formal variance request. The next board meeting is not until June 5th, so the earliest you could potentially get approval would be mid-June. That is 3 weeks away. Did you explain about the drought? I did, but Mrs. Carmichael pointed out that other residents are managing to maintain their lawns within the current restrictions. She suggested you adjust your landscaping to drought-resistant plants. I could not believe what I was hearing. Your HOA requires specific grass types. I cannot just replace it without approval, and that also requires board permission, right? Kevin's silence told me everything I needed to know. Look, I said, trying to stay calm. What if I park the truck on the street instead of my driveway? Would that work? The truck would need to be at least 25 feet from any residential structure and cannot block traffic or other vehicles. If Mrs. Carmichael determines it's a nuisance, she can still file a complaint. I thanked Kevin and hung up, my mind racing. I called Marcus back and asked if he could deliver the water with the truck parked on the street. He was willing to try, but when he showed up the following Tuesday, Deborah appeared within 5 minutes. This time, she had actually called the non-emergency police line, claiming the truck was blocking traffic. An officer arrived, and while he was sympathetic to my situation, he confirmed that the truck was partially blocking the roadway because of how narrow our street was. I am sorry, sir, but I need to ask the truck to relocate, the officer said. If there was an emergency vehicle that needed to get through here, it could be a problem. Marcus threw up his hands. This is not worth it, man. I am sorry, but I cannot keep doing this. Every time I come here, there is a problem. I have got other customers who do not give me this kind of hassle. And just like that, I lost my water delivery service. Over the next week, I watched my lawn slowly die. The grass turned yellow, then brown. I tried to water it with my garden hose during the permitted hours, but the city restrictions meant I could only water for 15 minutes, twice a week. It was not nearly enough. By the end of May, my front lawn looked like a dead wheat field, and that was when I received my second violation notice from the HOA. The letter, signed by Deborah Carmichael, informed me that my property was in violation of Section 7.3 of the HOA covenants, which required all front lawns to be maintained in a living, healthy state with appropriate coverage. The fine was $500, and I had 14 days to remedy the situation or face additional daily fines of $50. I sat in my living room, staring at that letter, and felt something inside me snap. This was insane. They had prevented me from getting the water I needed to maintain my lawn, and now they were fining me for the exact result they had caused. I decided to attend the June board meeting in person. It was held at the community clubhouse, a building that the HOA maintained near the neighborhood entrance. When I arrived at 7 in the evening, there were about 15 other residents already there, most of them looking as frustrated as I felt. The board consisted of Deborah and 4 other members: Harold Green, a retired accountant who seemed to agree with everything Deborah said; Patricia Fleming, a nervous woman in her 60s who rarely spoke; Michael Torres, a middle-aged man who actually seemed reasonable; and Sandra Hughes, who owned a local real estate office and spent most of the meetings checking her phone. Deborah called the meeting to order and started going through standard business: pool maintenance contracts, landscaping bids for the common areas, approval of the previous month's minutes. I sat there, my leg bouncing with impatience, waiting for the open forum portion where residents could speak. Finally, after 45 minutes of tedious procedural discussion, Deborah announced that they would hear from residents. I raised my hand immediately, and she acknowledged me with visible reluctance. "Yes, Grant, please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less." I stood up, holding my violation notice. "I want to address this fine I received for my dead lawn. The only reason my lawn is dead is because the HOA prevented me from receiving water deliveries that would have kept it alive. I was not violating any city ordinances. The water I was having delivered was legal and appropriate for irrigation, but Mrs. Carmichael blocked my delivery truck and threatened to have it towed." Deborah's expression did not change. "As I explained to you at the time, you were violating HOA policy regarding commercial vehicles. If you had followed the proper procedure and requested a variance, this could have been avoided. The proper procedure takes over a month. By the time I could get approval, the drought conditions could have killed my lawn anyway. This is a catch-22. I cannot maintain my lawn without water, but you would not let me get water." Michael Torres leaned forward. "Deborah, I think Grant has a point. Given the unusual circumstances with the drought, maybe we should consider waiving this particular fine." "The rules exist for a reason, Michael," Deborah responded. "If we start making exceptions, where does it end? Every homeowner would have an excuse for why they should not have to follow the guidelines." An older woman in the back raised her hand. "I have got the same problem. My lawn is dying, and I got a violation notice too. What are we supposed to do?" "Adjust your watering schedule, use drought-resistant landscaping, or find creative solutions within the existing framework," Deborah said. "But we need board approval to change our landscaping," someone else pointed out. "That takes months too." The meeting was starting to spiral into chaos, with multiple people trying to talk at once. Deborah banged her gavel on the table. "Order, please. Look, I understand that the drought is creating challenges for everyone, but we cannot simply abandon our community standards because things are difficult. These rules protect our property values. If we let the neighborhood deteriorate, all of our home values will drop." I felt my frustration boiling over. "So you are more concerned about appearance than about the impossible situation you are putting residents in?" "I am concerned about maintaining the standards that everyone agreed to when they purchased property in this community," Deborah shot back. "You all signed the HOA covenants. You knew what you were agreeing to." "I agreed to reasonable rules, not bureaucratic nonsense that makes it impossible to actually comply with other rules." "Mr. Patterson, I am going to ask you to sit down. You are becoming disruptive." Michael Torres spoke up again. "I would like to make a motion that we suspend enforcement of landscaping violations related to drought conditions until the state restrictions are lifted." "I second that," Patricia Fleming said quietly. Deborah's face flushed red. "We have a motion and a second. All in favor?" Michael and Patricia raised their hands. Harold and Sandra voted no. Deborah cast the deciding vote against the motion. "The motion fails. This meeting is adjourned." I left the clubhouse feeling more angry than when I had arrived. Several other residents stopped me in the parking lot, equally frustrated. One of them, a man named Tom who lived 3 streets over, had an interesting observation. "You notice how green the common areas still look? The entrance landscaping, the grass around the clubhouse, that big fountain in the center island? How come the HOA can keep all that alive, but we are getting fined for our lawns dying." I had not really thought about it, but he was right. The HOA maintained areas all looked pristine. The fountain in particular, a large, three-tiered stone structure at the main entrance to the neighborhood, was running constantly with crystal clear water. "They must have a separate water source or permit," I said. "Maybe, but it still seems pretty hypocritical, right?" I drove home, my mind churning. When I got back to my house, I pulled out my HOA documents and started reading through them carefully. There had to be something I could use here. That was when I found an interesting clause in Section 12.8. It stated that the HOA was responsible for maintaining all common areas and amenities using funds from regular assessments and reserves. It also noted that special assessments for capital improvements or emergency repairs require a majority vote of homeowners. I started doing some research on water permits and commercial usage in Bakersfield. What I discovered was fascinating. The fountain at the entrance was not just decorative. It was a recirculating system, but it still required significant water to replace evaporation and maintain proper levels, especially in drought conditions. I filed a California Public Records Act request with the city's water department asking for records of all commercial water permits in the Sagebrush Hills area. It took about 10 days, but I eventually received a response. The HOA had a commercial water account for irrigation and fountain maintenance. According to the records, they were using approximately 8,000 gallons per month, even with the drought restrictions. They had applied for and received a variance for essential community aesthetic maintenance, which apparently covered their fountain. So the HOA could get a variance for a decorative fountain, but I could not get approval for water deliveries to maintain the lawn they required me to have. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I started formulating a plan. If they wanted to play hardball with rules and regulations, I could do the same thing. My second violation notice arrived in mid-June, along with the $500 fine. The letter informed me that because I had not remedied the lawn situation, I now owed the original $500, plus an additional $700 in daily fines. I also owed the $200 from the original commercial vehicle violation, $1,400 in total, and my lawn was still dead because they would not let me water it properly. I decided it was time to take a different approach. I called Marcus back and offered him a deal. "What if I pay for a delivery, but you do not actually deliver it to my house? Just invoice me for it." He sounded confused. "Why would you want that?" "Because I am going to use that invoice to dispute my HOA fines. I can show that I attempted to arrange proper water delivery, and they refused to allow it. I need documentation." Marcus agreed, and I paid him the $240 for a delivery that never happened. He sent me an official invoice and a letter stating that he had attempted to make deliveries to my address but had been prevented by HOA interference. I also contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Amanda Richardson, and she had handled several cases in California involving HOA overreach. I explained my situation, and she agreed to review my documents. After examining everything, she gave me her assessment. "You have a decent case for what's called selective enforcement, where the HOA applies rules inconsistently. The fact that they are maintaining their fountain and common areas while preventing you from maintaining your required landscaping could support a claim that they are acting unreasonably. However, suing an HOA is expensive and time-consuming. You could easily spend $10,000 in legal fees." I did not have that kind of money. "What other options do I have?" "You could file a complaint with the California Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA management companies. You could also try mediation, though the HOA has to agree to that. Or you could just pay the fines and change your landscaping to something drought-resistant, which also requires HOA approval." "Exactly. You're in a difficult position. These cases are frustrating because HOAs have a lot of power, and unless they are clearly breaking the law, courts tend to defer to their authority." I thanked her for her time and paid her consultation fee, feeling more discouraged than ever. That evening, I went for a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. I ended up at the fountain near the entrance, watching the water cascade down the tiers. It really was impressive, probably 8 feet tall, made of stacked stone with LED lights that made it glow at night. A steady stream of water flowed from the top basin down to the lower levels, then recirculated back up through a pump system. The whole thing sat in a pool about 12 feet in diameter. I walked around it, examining the setup. There was a small equipment shed nearby, probably housing the pump and filtration system. A metal gate blocked access to the shed, secured with a standard padlock. An idea started forming in my mind. A petty, probably inadvisable idea. But the more I thought about it, the more appealing it became. The fountain required water to function. Specifically, it needed regular refilling to replace water lost to evaporation and splashing. In this heat, that was probably 50 to 100 gallons per week. The water came from the HOA's maintenance budget, funded by our monthly dues. My monthly HOA dues were $325. I had been paying them faithfully for 7 years. That was over $27,000 I had contributed to the HOA's operating fund. If they wanted to find me $1,400 for a situation they had created, while using community funds to maintain a decorative fountain during a drought, maybe it was time for them to make a choice about priorities. I spent the next few days researching the fountain's mechanical system. I found the original installation specs in the HOA's meeting minutes from 2018. Which were publicly available to homeowners. The system included a 500-gallon reservoir tank buried beneath the fountain, an automated fill valve connected to the water line, and a pump that circulated about 100 gallons per minute. The fill valve was the key. It was designed to automatically add water when the reservoir level dropped below a certain point. But like most automated systems, it had a manual shutoff valve for maintenance purposes. I knew what I needed to do. I just had to decide if I was actually going to do it. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for July 3rd. I received a notice that my outstanding fines would be discussed, and if I did not pay them within 5 business days after the meeting, the HOA would place a lien on my property. A lien. For trying to water my lawn during a drought. That made my decision for me. On the night of June 28th, I waited until well after midnight when the neighborhood was completely quiet. I dressed in dark clothes and walked to the fountain. The area was not monitored by cameras, something I had verified during my earlier visits. The equipment shed's padlock was a basic master lock, nothing sophisticated. I had brought bolt cutters, but I tried something else first. I pulled out my phone and searched for the default combination that Master Lock used for their products before customers set their own codes. I tried it on the lock. It opened. Apparently, whoever had installed this lock had never bothered to change the factory setting. I shook my head at the sloppiness and opened the shed door. Inside, just as I had expected from the installation specs, was a maze of PVC pipes, the circulation pump, a filtration system, and various valves. I found the main water supply line, a 3/4-inch pipe coming from the underground water main. Following it with my flashlight, I located the manual shutoff valve. I hesitated for a moment, my hand on the valve. This was vandalism, technically. I could get in serious trouble if I was caught. But then I thought about that $1,400 fine, the lien they were threatening against my house, and Deborah's smug face as she blocked my water delivery. I thought about the hypocrisy of maintaining this fountain while homeowners were being fined for dead lawns. I turned the valve clockwise until it stopped. The water supply to the fountain was now shut off. I closed the equipment shed, snapped the lock back in place, and walked home. My heart was pounding, but I also felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Over the next several days, I made a point of driving past the fountain regularly. At first, nothing seemed different. The existing water in the reservoir kept it running normally, but as the California sun beat down and water evaporated, the level began to drop. By July 2nd, the top tier was no longer flowing. By the evening of July 3rd, only the bottom basin had water, and the pump was starting to make strained noises as it struggled with the low level. I attended the board meeting that evening, curious to see if anyone had noticed yet. Deborah called the meeting to order and immediately addressed my situation. We need to discuss the outstanding fines owed by Mr. Patterson. As of today, the total amount owed is $1,400. Mr. Patterson, have you brought payment this evening? I stood up. No, I have not. I'm disputing these fines on the grounds that the HOA created an impossible situation. You prevented me from obtaining water to maintain my lawn, then fined me when the lawn died as a direct result of your interference. I have documentation from the water delivery company stating that they attempted to provide service but were blocked by HOA actions. I handed copies of Marcus's letter to each board member. Harold Green barely glanced at it. The commercial vehicle policy is clear. You violated it. I followed every city ordinance and state law. The only thing I violated was an overly restrictive HOA interpretation that makes it impossible to actually maintain the property standards you require. Michael Torres was reading the letter carefully. Deborah, I think we need to seriously consider Grant's position here. He has a valid point about being put in an untenable situation. He could have applied for a variance, Deborah insisted, which takes over a month to process. By design, that system makes it impossible to respond to urgent situations like drought conditions. Sandra Hughes, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. I actually agree with Michael. This seems like we are being unreasonable. I move that we waive the fines and work with Mr. Patterson to find a solution for his landscaping. I second that motion, Michael said immediately. Deborah looked furious, but she had to allow the vote. All in favor? Michael, Sandra, and Patricia all raised their hands. Harold voted no, and Deborah abstained, which meant the motion passed. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Thank you. I appreciate the board being reasonable about this. We still need to address your lawn situation, Deborah said coldly. We cannot have properties looking like that indefinitely. I agree. I would like to apply for approval to replace the grass with drought-resistant landscaping, native plants, decorative rock, maybe some California poppies. Submit your proposal in writing with a detailed plan and plant list. We will review it at next month's meeting, Deborah said. It was not perfect, but it was progress. I left the meeting feeling like maybe I had not needed to sabotage the fountain after all, but the next morning I received an email from Deborah that changed everything. The email, sent to all homeowners, announced that due to unexpected maintenance issues, there would be a special assessment of $250 per household to repair and refill the community fountain. The fountain had apparently run dry, and the pump had burned out from running without adequate water. The total repair cost was estimated at $12,000. I read the email 3 times, hardly believing what I was seeing. They were going to charge every homeowner $250 because their fountain had broken down. The email went on to explain that the fountain was a vital community amenity that enhances property values and that all homeowners benefit from its presence. Therefore, the special assessment was justified and would be added to everyone's August HOA dues. My phone started ringing almost immediately. It was Tom, the guy I had talked to in the parking lot after the previous meeting. Are you seeing this? $250 for a fountain during a drought when people are getting fined for their lawns dying? I see it, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. I felt a twinge of guilt about what I had done, but it was overshadowed by anger at their response. A bunch of us are organizing a protest. We are going to demand a homeowner vote on this assessment. The bylaws say special assessments over a certain amount require majority approval. You in? Absolutely. Over the next week, Tom and several other residents, including a woman named Lisa who was a paralegal, organized a petition. They collected signatures from homeowners opposing the special assessment and demanding a formal vote. I signed it, along with over 60% of the neighborhood. We had more than enough to force a vote according to the HOA bylaws. Deborah was furious when she received the petition. She sent another email stating that the board would hold a special meeting on July 15th to address the assessment vote. In the meantime, the fountain sat empty and silent at the neighborhood entrance. Every time I drove past it, I felt a mix of satisfaction and guilt. I had not intended to cause a $12,000 repair bill. I just wanted to make a point about the water situation. But now that it had happened, I certainly was not going to confess. The special meeting was packed. The clubhouse held about 60 people comfortably, but there had to be at least 100 residents crammed in there. People were standing along the walls and sitting in the aisles. Deborah tried to maintain control, but the crowd was hostile from the start. Booty browse. We are here to vote on the proposed special assessment for fountain repairs, she announced. Before we vote, I want to explain why this is necessary. The fountain is not just decorative, it is a defining feature of our community. Real estate agents specifically mention it when showing properties here. It directly impacts our home values. So does having a lawn that we are not allowed to water, someone shouted from the back. The room erupted in agreement. Lisa, the paralegal, stood up. I have reviewed the HOA budget and financial statements. We currently have over $30,000 in our reserve fund. Why can't we use that for the fountain repair instead of charging homeowners a special assessment? Deborah's expression tightened. The reserve fund is designated for emergency repairs and capital improvements for essential infrastructure. A fountain does not qualify under our current reserve policy. But you just said it was a vital community amenity, Michael Torres pointed out. It is vital for property values, but it is not essential infrastructure like roads or plumbing. Tom raised his hand. I'm confused. If it is vital enough to justify a $12,000 special assessment, why is it not vital enough to use our existing reserves? We have been paying into that fund for years, specifically for situations like this. Harold Green spoke up, his voice condescending. The reserve fund has specific allocations that were determined by a professional reserve study. We cannot simply spend that money on anything we want. Lisa pulled out a thick document. I obtained a copy of the most recent reserve study. It includes a line item for water features and decorative elements with an allocated reserve of $15,000. So actually, yes, we can use the reserve fund for this. The room went completely silent. Deborah's face turned bright red. That allocation is for routine maintenance, not major repairs, she stammered. The reserve study specifically states that the allocation covers repair and replacement of water features, including pumps, basins, and associated equipment. Lisa read directly from the document. This repair falls exactly within that scope. I watched as Deborah realized she was cornered. She had tried to force a special assessment when the money was already available in reserves. The question was why. Michael Torres was clearly thinking the same thing. Deborah, why are we even discussing a special assessment if we have reserve funds allocated for exactly this purpose? Because we need to maintain adequate reserves for other potential issues, she said weakly. We have over $30,000 in reserves, and this repair is $12,000. That would still leave us with $18,000, which is above the minimum threshold recommended in the reserve study, Lisa countered. Sandra Hughes looked at Deborah with obvious suspicion. What's really going on here? Why are you so insistent on a special assessment? Before Deborah could answer, Harold Green made a crucial mistake. The board has already approved a contract with Prestige Fountain and Pool Services for the repairs. The owner is Deborah's brother-in-law, and he gave us a competitive bid. The room exploded in outrage. People were shouting over each other, demanding explanations. I sat there stunned, realizing what had just been revealed. Deborah had tried to force a special assessment to funnel $12,000 to her brother-in-law's company, even though the HOA had existing funds to cover the repair. Michael Torres stood up, his face red with anger. Deborah, this is a serious conflict of interest. You should have disclosed this relationship and recused yourself from any vote regarding the contract. I was planning to disclose it, Deborah protested, and Harold is wrong. My brother-in-law's company was not the only bid we received. How many other bids did you get? Tom asked. Deborah hesitated just long enough for everyone to know the answer. You only got one bid, didn't you? Lisa said, from your relative's company. We reached out to 3 companies. Only one responded with a bid in our time frame. What time frame? Someone demanded. The fountain only broke down 2 weeks ago. This was spiraling out of control, and I was starting to feel genuinely guilty about my role in it. I had shut off the water to make a point about the HOA's priorities during the drought. I had not intended to create an opportunity for Deborah to commit what might be fraud or embezzlement. Patricia Fleming, who usually stayed quiet during meetings, spoke up in a shaky voice. Deborah, I need to know the truth. Did you shut off the water to the fountain intentionally so you could create a repair contract for your brother-in-law? The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Everyone stared at Deborah, waiting for her answer. That is absolutely absurd, Deborah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Why would I sabotage HOA property? To create a $12,000 contract for a family member, Michael said flatly. Patricia, I think we need to call for an emergency vote to suspend Deborah from the board, pending an investigation into this matter. I second that, Sandra said immediately. You cannot do that, Harold protested. That is not in the bylaws. Lisa stood up again. Actually, under California Civil Code Section 5110, homeowner association boards have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the association. If there is credible evidence of a conflict of interest or potential fraud, the board can vote to temporarily remove a member pending investigation. The bylaws do not need to specifically authorize it, because state law already does. I was impressed by Lisa's knowledge. Deborah, meanwhile, looked like she might throw up. This is ridiculous, she said. I have done nothing wrong. The fountain requires repair, and we need to fix it. Whether we use reserves or a special assessment is a board decision, and we are allowed to contract with qualified vendors regardless of any personal relationships. Not without disclosure, Michael said firmly, and not when you are potentially creating a problem to justify the contract. I am calling for a vote. All board members in favor of temporarily suspending Deborah Carmichael from the board pending an independent investigation into the fountain repair contract? Michael, Patricia, and Sandra all raised their hands. Harold abstained. Deborah obviously voted against it, but the motion passed. This is outrageous, Deborah said, gathering her papers. You will be hearing from my lawyer. She stormed out of the meeting, leaving the remaining board members looking shell-shocked. Michael took over as acting president. Okay, let's address the immediate issues. First, I move that we table the special assessment vote and instead allocate $12,000 from our reserve fund for fountain repairs, as appropriate under our reserve study. We will obtain at least 3 competitive bids from licensed contractors with no relationship to any board member. The motion passed unanimously, both from the board and from a voice vote of the homeowners present. Second, Michael continued, I move that we hire an independent forensic accountant to review all HOA financial transactions for the past 2 years, specifically looking at any contracts or expenditures that may involve conflicts of interest. That motion also passed. The meeting continued for another hour, with various homeowners voicing concerns and suggestions. By the time it ended, the HOA had essentially been restructured. Michael had been officially voted in as temporary president, and 2 additional homeowners had been appointed to fill vacant board positions. I walked out feeling like maybe justice had been served, even though I still carried the secret of what I had actually done to the fountain. Over the next several weeks, things moved quickly. The forensic accountant, a woman named Grace who had extensive experience with HOA audits, began digging into the financial records. What she found was disturbing. At a special board meeting in early August, Grace presented her findings. I attended, along with most of the neighborhood. Over the past 18 months, Grace explained, there have been 7 separate contracts awarded to vendors with direct family or business relationships to Deborah Carmichael. Total value of these contracts, $43,000. None of these relationships were disclosed to the homeowners, and in several cases, there is evidence that competitive bidding was not conducted as required by the bylaws. She pulled up a slide showing the breakdown. Landscaping services from Deborah's cousin's company, pool maintenance from her brother-in-law's business, roof repairs on the clubhouse from a company owned by Harold Green's son, painting services from a contractor who, according to bank records, had made several large payments directly to Deborah's personal account. That last one is particularly concerning, Grace said. The HOA paid Sunshine Painting Services $18,000 for exterior painting of common area structures last fall. Within 2 weeks of receiving that payment, Sunshine transferred $12,000 to an account owned by Deborah Carmichael. When I contacted the owner of Sunshine Painting, he claimed it was repayment of a personal loan. However, I could find no documentation of any such loan, and the timing is highly suspicious. Someone in the audience asked the obvious question. Is that fraud? It could be fraud, embezzlement, kickbacks, or several other potential crimes, Grace said carefully. That determination would need to be made by law enforcement or the district attorney. My job is just to identify irregularities in the financial records. Michael Torres looked grim. I think we need to turn this report over to the police and the California Department of Real Estate. The board voted unanimously to do so. I sat there feeling overwhelmed. I had shut off a fountain's water supply to make a petty point about HOA hypocrisy, and I had accidentally uncovered what appeared to be a significant embezzlement scheme. Within a week, news spread that the Kern County District Attorney's Office had opened an investigation into Deborah Carmichael and the Sagebrush Hills HOA. Deborah hired a criminal defense attorney and stopped attending any HOA functions. The fountain remained empty throughout all of this. The board had decided to postpone repairs until the investigation was complete in case the fountain itself was evidence of fraud. In September, I finally received approval for my drought-resistant landscaping plan. I spent 2 weekends ripping out the dead grass and installing a beautiful arrangement of native plants, decorative gravel, and a few drought-tolerant succulents. It looked better than the grass ever had, and it required virtually no water. Several of my neighbors followed suit, and soon the whole street had a cohesive desert landscape aesthetic that actually made more sense for California than trying to maintain green lawns during a drought. The investigation into Deborah took months. During that time, I struggled with whether I should admit what I had done to the fountain. On one hand, I had committed vandalism. On the other hand, if I had not done it, the embezzlement might never have been discovered. I eventually confided in Tom, who I had become friends with through all of this. Man, you are overthinking this," he said when I told him. "You shut off a water valve, that's it. You did not steal money or create fake contracts. If anything, you accidentally did the neighborhood a favor." "But what if they ask during the investigation? They might want to know what caused the fountain to fail." "The fountain failed because Deborah did not properly maintain it. Even if you shut off the water, she should have noticed and fixed it immediately. The fact that she did not shows negligence at best." He had a point, but I still felt uneasy. In November, the district attorney announced formal charges against Deborah Carmichael. She was charged with embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The total amount allegedly stolen or fraudulently obtained was $67,000 when investigators expanded their review to include her entire tenure on the board. Harold Green was also charged as an accomplice in some of the schemes, though his role appeared to be more passive. He had allegedly known about the conflicts of interest and failed to report them, while also benefiting from contracts awarded to his son's company. The case went to trial in March of 2027. I was not called to testify, as I had no direct knowledge of the financial crimes, but I attended several days of the trial, watching as prosecutors laid out a detailed pattern of corruption. Deborah's defense was that she had been trying to save the HOA money by working with vendors she trusted. Her attorney argued that the payments she received were legitimate loan repayments and that any failure to disclose conflicts of interest was an oversight, not criminal intent. The jury did not buy it. After 3 days of deliberation, they found her guilty on all counts. Harold Green accepted a plea deal and testified against Deborah, receiving probation in exchange for his cooperation. Deborah Carmichael was sentenced to 4 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, including the $67,000 she had stolen, plus additional penalties and interest. The HOA used the restitution money to replenish the reserve fund and make several much-needed repairs to common areas that had been neglected during Deborah's tenure. As for the fountain, the new board held a homeowner vote on whether to repair it or remove it entirely. Given the drought conditions and the bad associations with Deborah's crimes, a majority voted to remove it. In May of 2027, a crew dismantled the fountain and replaced it with a beautiful drought-resistant garden featuring native California plants, decorative boulders, and a simple monument sign for the neighborhood. It cost less than half what the fountain repair would have been, required no water, and looked fantastic. I drove past that garden every day on my way to work, and I always felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride that the neighborhood had rooted out corruption, relief that my landscaping was finally approved and looked great, and a lingering guilt about my role in starting the whole chain of events. One evening in late May, almost exactly a year after I'd shut off the fountain's water supply, I was working in my front yard when Michael Torres stopped by. He had remained HOA president and was doing an excellent job. "Garden looks great, Grant," he said, admiring my native plants. "Thanks. I should have done this years ago instead of fighting with grass. Hey, I wanted to ask you something. He had a strange expression on his face. Off the record, my heart started racing. Sure. Did you shut off the water to that fountain last summer? I froze, unsure how to respond. After a long moment, I nodded. Yeah, I did. Michael was quiet for a moment, then he started laughing. I thought so. I could never quite figure out how the water supply valve got turned off. It was too specific to be random vandalism. Are you going to report me? Report you for what? Technically, you vandalized HOA property. But given that your actions inadvertently exposed a major embezzlement scheme and probably saved the neighborhood hundreds of thousands of dollars over time, I think we can call it even. Besides, the statute of limitations for vandalism under $5,000 is only 1 year in California, and that expired last month. I felt an enormous weight lift off my shoulders. I never intended for any of this to happen. I was just angry about the water delivery situation and the fines. I know. And honestly, Deborah created that whole mess herself. If she had just been reasonable about your water deliveries, none of this would have happened. She was so focused on petty power trips that she got sloppy with her real crimes. We stood there for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. For what it's worth, Michael said, I think you did the right thing. Maybe not the legal thing, but definitely the right thing. After he left, I went inside and poured myself a drink. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The drought, the water tanker, Deborah's obstruction, the dead lawn, the fines, the fountain, and everything that followed. It had been exhausting and stressful, but in the end, the neighborhood was better off. We had a functional HOA board that actually listened to residents. We had drought-appropriate landscaping throughout the community, and we had removed a corrupt official who had been stealing from everyone for years. I sat on my back patio, looking at my thriving desert garden, and realized that sometimes the best way to deal with bureaucratic injustice is not to fight it head-on, but to find the pressure points that expose the underlying rot. Deborah Carmichael had taken my water tanker in a drought and refused to acknowledge the impossible situation she created. She had fined me for the predictable result of her own actions. She had prioritized a decorative fountain over residents' ability to maintain their properties. So I had let their fountain go empty. And in doing so, I had accidentally uncovered a scheme that had been bleeding the neighborhood dry in a completely different way. As I finished my drink and watched the stars come out over Bakersfield, I thought about the strange way justice sometimes works, not through official channels or proper procedures, but through small acts of resistance that create opportunities for truth to surface. The drought eventually ended in early 2028, with record rainfall that winter. But the changes in our neighborhood persisted. Most people kept their drought-resistant landscaping because it was easier and made more sense for the climate. The HOA continued to operate transparently and efficiently under Michael's leadership. And where the fountain once stood, native wildflowers bloomed every spring, fed by natural rainfall instead of wasted water, a living reminder that sometimes the most beautiful solutions are the ones that work with nature instead of against it. I never told anyone else about what I had done, except for Tom and Michael. It remained a secret between the three of us, a small act of rebellion that had grown into something much larger than I ever intended. But every time I drove past that garden entrance, I smiled, because in a strange way, that empty fountain had been the most valuable thing the HOA ever installed. Not because of what it was, but because of what its absence revealed. And that, I supposed, was worth every gallon of water it had ever wasted.